Game masters and world builders, legends have power. They're not just pretty stories, they serve a function. And in your TTRPG game, you may have been underutilizing their potential. Because a well-designed legend can be what makes the difference between bland world building and inspired rich storytelling. Welcome to Dragon Week, a community event where you'll see an insane number of TTRPG people on YouTube come together to summon a dragon.
To become a dragon.
To slay a dragon.
Or seduce the dragon?
To talk about dragons and dragon-related things. And for Dragon Week, I'm going to tell you a story. It's a story about my favorite dragon in folklore and one of my favorite historical controversies. But beyond that, the story will be a jumping-off point for a larger reflection on what that legend can teach us about the nature of folklore and how we can better leverage legends in our TTRPG games. So take out your world-building notes, because in this one, I'm going to ask you a list of questions and prompts that you should ask yourself about the legends in your own game. Our story begins on the banks of the Seine River in medieval France, and more specifically in Rouen, Normandy. There are many stories to tell here. That of its first duke, the Viking leader Rollo, of the Black Plague and a mysterious mummified cat, or that of Joan of Arc, who met her unfortunate demise on the market square of Rouen. But the one we shall speak of today is the tale of the gargoyle and of some light beheading. If you thought of this, you may be a nerd. If you thought of this, you may be European, but also probably still a nerd. But the Gargoyle of Rouen was neither of these things. It is the name that was given to a dreadful water dragon capable of spitting destructive torrents of water. There once was a horrible serpent in the swampy lands near the city of Rouen who was the cause of devastating chaos. The dragon ambushed and devoured men, killed horses, and corrupted the air with its pestilent breath. And it alone brought to the country all the fear and havoc that an entire troop of enemies could bring. The problem had to be dealt with, and there was one man right for the job, Saint Romanus, Bishop of Rouen. And this is him. Romanus of Rouen was bishop during the rule of Dagobert I, King of France, whom we frankly don't care about too much here, but it places this story somewhere in the 7th century, and that will be relevant information later. Romanus already had a bunch of miracles under his belt, collapsing a whole temple by removing a single statue, summoning an angel to banish a demon, or having his whole body floating in the air while saying mass.
Clerics, look at this guy. What's your excuse?
But a whole dragon, that's spooky. So he searched for brave souls to accompany him. Naturally, the brave people of Rouen refused because they have common sense. The only ones who agreed were ones who had nothing to lose. 2 prisoners condemned to death. One of them ran away as soon as he got the chance and was promptly caught and beheaded. The other did join Romanus on his journey, and they ventured together out of the city along the banks of the Seine until they reached the swampy lands where the dragon resided. And here it was, a fierce and terrifying beast. Along with sharp fangs, the creature had claws that tore through flesh to mutilate the bodies of the inhabitants. And before this dreadful spectacle now stood our 2 men. I feel like now is a good time to have a little talk because I'm talking so much about Christianity, especially because this is a very international community and people's relationship to religion might vary a lot. Personally, I'm not religious. I mean, my roommates are a bunch of haunted dolls, which clearly doesn't help. But growing up in a place like this, for a lot of people here, religion is just part of the backdrop. Inevitably, it's still woven into architecture, into historical and cultural landmarks. And because in its early days Christianity was all about assimilation, because that made it easier to convert people to the religion, there's also lots of local folklore and legends tangled into it. I think the most famous example is Saint Bridget, who was a pagan figure very important to Ireland and was later made into a Christian saint. So even though I don't practice a religion, I've grown up surrounded by all these layers of history. Some sacred, but also some architectural and some folkloric. Churches and cathedrals are just part of the landscape here, and they're a big part of tourism, religious or not. Lots of people visit them for more secular reasons, for the history or for the beauty of the buildings. Which doesn't mean we shouldn't be respectful when visiting these places, because they are places of worship to some of the people who are here. So at least to me personally, this legend is more about local folklore and history than it is about faith. I hope that makes things a bit more clear with the approach that the video is taking. Back to the story. This story doesn't end in somersaults and fancy swordplay, which I can't lie, I'm a bit disappointed. Instead, as he stood before the dragon, Romanus held up his holy symbol, the little channel divinity, and by sheer force of faith brought the dreadful gargoyle to submit and bow its head. Romanus then tied his bishop's tools around the neck of the dragon and led it like a well-trained little puppy back to the main square of Rouen, where they chopped off its head, hung it on the cathedrals, and burned the rest of the body. Only reason they didn't burn the head is because in that particular legend, the head and throat of a dragon are immune to fire damage. Romanus later became the patron saint of the city. As for the prisoner, to thank him for his bravery, he was released and got to enjoy the rest of his life as a free man. The end. Well, officially. But the real interesting stuff is what came after. In the 13th century, almost 5 centuries after Saint Romanus, is when the controversy begins. Now is a good moment to put on your Game Master hat because we're going to start reflecting on the nature of legends. Here's a fundamental truth about mortals. I mean, people. Humans are creatures that like making up stories. We're on TTRPG YouTube, we all play TTRPG, so you can't tell me I'm wrong here. But narratives are what humans use to make sense of so much of their existence. I really love legends, so when I started playing TTRPG and doing world building, of course I was going to play with them. But back then I wasn't thinking about those legends as a game master. I was thinking as just someone who likes legends. To level up my legends, I needed to look to the backstage, at how legends are formed and how they impact people. There is a reason why these stories are remembered and have survived the trial of time. Legends are not just pretty stories, they are functional tools. And the legend of Saint Romanus and the Gargoyle is a perfect example. In 1210 is when we find the first record of something called the Privilege of Saint Romanus. This was a religious event in the city of Rouen where the archbishop had the right to release one prisoner each year on Ascension Day. That first mention of the event in historical records only happened because basically the king really didn't like that whole business. Pardoning a prisoner was a royal privilege, not a religious one. So he sent people to investigate, and the 9 priests interrogated all had the same story.
Yeah, it's totally a thing. It's been a thing for a while, like since what, like Dagobert? Or
No, this is 100% a real thing.
Yeah. For holy reasons.
Yeah, like
it's a holy thing.
we pray about it every day.
Yeah, all the time. We love praying about it.
Every day.
When asked about the origins of this privilege, they named a legend about the patron saint of the city defeating a dragon. Which was really in fashion. Every city in France seems to have a story about a bishop fighting a dragon. But the evidence told a different story. There were plenty of texts on the life of Saint Romanus and his miracles, but none that ever mentioned anything about a dragon. But with no way to prove that it didn't happen, the privilege of Saint Romanus stayed in place until the French Revolution. And boy was it abused. It was an opportunity for the church to really show their power, so they would look for the most despicable, cruel possible crimes for their pardons. Hundreds of murderers were released. It became a tool of corruption from the royal court as well. They were making little deals with the church so their buddies could get pardoned for their crimes. And though the event was contested many times and led to countless riots, it stayed in effect for centuries, all justified by a distant legend that may have been entirely fabricated. So what can we learn from this legend? Oh, like morally? Like the moral of the story? No, I mean, how can we exploit that as game masters? Here's a few functions that legends can serve and a few questions you can ask yourself to enrich them in your game. Legends can justify the existence of systems and rules, like here with the privilege of Saint Romanus. It's not necessarily political, though it can be more pragmatic. Another great example is from Curse's Chat, and I will let you skip to here if you don't want spoilers. I'm not actually sure if this is from the official book or if it's just something that someone said on the internet, but there is this idea floating around that in Barovia it's bad luck to harm a raven. And the were-ravens would have been the ones who started this belief. In doing so, as the superstition becomes more popularized, the were-ravens benefit from this extra layer of safety when they're snooping around in their raven form. End of spoilers. Here's a few questions you can reflect on about the legends in your games. If a legend exists, who benefits from it and how so? Has it ever been contested? What happens to the people who contest it? Are they silenced? Are they visionaries? Are they called delusional, or are they just ignored? Is there evidence that exists to contradict this story? If so, where is it and who knows about it? Is there evidence or artifacts that were fabricated in order to support the legend? What if all this were exposed? I have a little all thought about the gargoyle, and it's nowhere solid enough to be even considered a theory. Don't even take this as speculation. None of this is coming from the mouth of a historian. I am just a person making silly videos about my make-believe games, and there is literally no evidence to back what I'm about to tell you. I read somewhere that mascara in an old dialect from southwestern France is a word to say a sea dragon or a sea serpent. Mascara? That sounds a lot like masquerade. If you're from where I'm from, you might know that word. The masquerade is a tidal wave that comes from the sea and runs back up the river. Today the banks of the Seine are paved with concrete and super safe, but back in the day the masquerade could be destructive. The kind of stuff that completely messes up crops and even kills people. And that kind of sounds familiar. Very real events being told via metaphor are a very common phenomenon. Legends can be attempts to explain the unexplainable, to soften the reality, to make sense of the painful, the brutal, the sudden, or just the plain bizarre. There's literally no evidence that would even begin to hint at the gargoyle being a metaphor for the masquerade, but it's a fun one to think about, and it can inspire a few questions for world building. So what about your legends? Is some part of this legend a metaphor or a cover-up for something else? And why let the truth fall into oblivion? Was it even intentional? Was the truth too difficult to bear? Or was it purposefully concealed in order to protect something? Either case, does anyone remember the truth? Or did all traces of it slowly degrade through history? What are the long-term effects of this oblivion? Some legends exist to mirror the beliefs of a society. Societies have behaviors and beliefs that are discouraged or encouraged, and stories are a vehicle to pass them on. It can be unintentional. After all, widely spread values are bound to show up in popular media. But it can also be purpose-built. Think of cautionary tales. They essentially package a lesson into a neat, easily digestible narrative, and hopefully protect kids from stranger danger or teach them to be kind. But where it gets fun as a game master is when we step away from common real-world examples. What if the values being passed on from generation to generation in your game were things like secrecy, indulgence, rebellion, unending thirst for knowledge? The inhabitants of a town with a history of fairy abductions might keep their real names a secret and encourage their children to be secretive about personal information. That expectation is reinforced by bedtime stories that teach the value of paranoia and mistrust, in which the heroes are cunning children who cloak themselves in secrecy and thus thwart the evil plans of evil pixies who would use this information against them. Let's take this idea and make it a tad darker. Isn't storytelling a great tool for propaganda? People don't respond super well to directly being told what to do. But legends and stories don't tell you what to do, they just provide a narrative in which there is a clear hero and villain. People are gonna identify with one or the other, and preferably they will identify to the hero who gets all the nice things. In the legend of Saint Romanus, the prisoner who runs away from danger and duty is caught, and this vice becomes his downfall. Meanwhile, the one who showed bravery is greatly rewarded, even as a criminal. Apparently, they didn't have a lot of cautionary tales about not doing crime in the first place. So here's a few questions. What ideal, value, or belief does this legend reinforce? Was it created intentionally? If so, by whom? Is the legend entirely fabricated or still steeped in reality? Do some people oppose the legend? That's all well and good, but world building is only relevant if the players can interact with it, rather than just hear it as background noise in an info dump and then proceed to forget about it forever. The most important question to ask yourself about the legends in your game is this: why the hell would my players care? Maybe because paying attention to this information can be rewarding. It could help solve a little puzzle. Or if some events in your game are mirrored by a legend, the one who knows how the story goes can anticipate what comes next and increase their odds. If you remember that in the legend the head of the gargoyle couldn't be burned with fire, maybe don't blow your budget on flaming arrows. But beyond that pragmatic, functional stuff, legends can create emotional depth and be the catalyst for character arcs. How could a legend matter to player characters on a psychological and emotional level? It could mirror their own backstory, challenge their worldview, or shape how NPCs interact with them. Agnes grew up being compared to a heroic figure from local myth, and the same heroic expectations are now put on her shoulders. Or this curse from a legend sounds very similar to the one that Dorothy has been struggling with. Or maybe Winifred's values clash with the worldview presented by a well-known tale. It will be up to the player to decide how their character feels about that, but you will have created a catalyst for them. Will Agnes hate the crushing weight of this pressure? Or will she thrive in that sense of duty and in being the hope that people want to see in her? So for each legend, ask yourself, what about this tale could feel personal to the player character? In that way, they become a very relevant part of the character's narrative, and your players are far more likely to care. Hopefully these prompts can be a good starting point in making legends feel more intentional, interactive, rich, and personalized. By the way, this story may have been about a medieval dragon, but this doesn't mean that it only works in medieval fantasy. Neon-lit cyberpunk streets, a lone bunker in a post-apocalyptic wasteland, or a spaceship flying through space, they all have their own legends. The flavor changes, but the function stays the same. With this, I shall leave you to enjoy the Dragon Week festivities. A whole playlist awaits, and I hope to see you there. On this note, have a good evening, and remember, if you can see the dragon's teeth, it's already too late.